So we talk about the tender years doctrine and debunking that tender years doctrine. Most individuals that promote like an 80-20, 27 days a month for a woman and 4 days for a man will invoke a tender years doctrine that basically says, oh, well, kids belong with moms. Do kids belong with moms?
Kids
solely. I mean, do
Right,
kids
yes.
belong with moms solely?
Kids belong with moms, but not solely. Kids do worse at every age with when they have only one parent. The research starts as early as before a regularly mature birth. So prematurely born children are more likely to develop their brains better and get out of the hospital sooner and have more psychomotor functioning, which is a high correlate to brain development. When the father is visiting the hospital and there as much as possible, the more they're there. This is research by Kyle Pruitt at Yale University on the even the prematurely born children. And then from the day the children are born in normal maturity on, and those first few years, the importance of the father being involved is enormous. So, for example, a father breathing on the child when it's first born helps the bonding process occur. It also changes the dad's brain. That is, the sooner the father gets involved with the child and the more he does, the more there's a whole nest of neurons in male brains that begin to develop, connect, and connect with each other. And then they have a mimicking of the, just like a woman has a motherhood instinct, this connection of all the neurons in a father's brain, the whole nest of neurons create the equivalent of a mother instinct. It's mostly overlapping with the mother instinct, but it also has different parts of that instinct. And so the father then becomes more involved because more oxytocin is developed, his testosterone level gets lower, and the neurons connect in such a way that he doesn't need outside sex chasing different women. He is thoroughly satisfied with the emotional intimacy of connecting with his own children. And so who benefits from that? The mother benefits from that, from the father. Instead of chasing around with another woman, he's desiring to come home as quickly as possible to play with the children. And the child benefits from that, female child or a male child. The accurate part of the tender years doctrine is that children desperately need parents in their tender years. The incorrect aspect of the tender year doctrine is that the time that the children most need their fathers is in the tender years.
On equal time, correct?
Yes. Yes.
I read a study, well, we're talking about boundary reinforcement, that men typically give a lot of boundary reinforcement, and that's a very positive outcome that leads to
Postponed gratification.
Which lead to success in life.
Right.
I found it interesting when I read this study, it talked about playgrounds, how playgrounds in the 70s and 80s seemed to have a lot of concrete. And they changed to recycled material playgrounds for rubber playgrounds. And ironically, the rubber playgrounds have a lot more injuries than the concrete playgrounds. And the construct inside of that was, when you're playing on a playground, if it's concrete and you fall, better not to take that risk.
Yes.
I saw an interesting correlation in an analogy for raising children like that.
Yes. So there's a lot of important truths in this. And this you see in the tension between mom and dad about risk-taking, especially physical risk-taking. So example, on average, a child that says, Mom, can I climb the tree in the backyard? The mom will say, well, maybe, sweetie, in a few years you can, but right now you're too young to do that. You could fall and you could hurt yourself. And dad will tend to say, child of the same age, well, I guess so. You'll be careful, right? Yeah, I'll be careful. Okay, well, you go out and you be careful. Just climb the tree, but be careful. The kid says to the mother, Dad said I could climb the tree. And mom goes, oh, wait a minute, just a second. And dad and mom have a big argument. And the frequent result is something like this. Mom says he's too young to climb the tree, or she's too young to climb the tree. And dad says the children gain a lot. They'll be okay. He'll know when not to go far. And mother says, you must be so naive. And who's right? They're both right. And so what ends up happening with checks and balance parenting, the mother and father negotiate a deal. And the mother says something like, okay, they can climb the tree, but they can't climb above this area. The child needs to know that not on this branch, which is too thin. And so the dad says, okay. No. Okay is not enough. Give me your cell phone and go out there and you be under the tree while that's happening. And so what's happened? The mother and father have negotiated a deal that allows the child to do the risk taking that occurs when she or he can climb the tree, but also allows the child to have a safety net so that in case she or he makes a mistake in the risk taking and falls, the father can be reasonably there to either cushion the fall or whatever. So what happens from that is that we now know that we didn't know before is that child, every time she or he is taking the risk as to deciding what branch to climb on, what branch is too thin, what branch isn't, and how do I prove myself able to climb to the top of the tree in a way that can get my father and mother to approve of me doing that and also climb higher than Jimmy or Jane can climb to prove that I'm better than Jimmy and Jane. Those are all the dynamics that are going on. And so the mother and father have to negotiate those dynamics. But what no one knows is that the more the child has to make all those decisions, the more effectively their brains, neurons connect, and the more they develop intelligence. Not just intelligence comes from a type of intelligence comes from risk taking that doesn't come when you have problems solved for you or you don't take those risks to begin with.
So when you have problems solved for you.
Yes.
So the issue of why you have so many boys failing in the teen years, you have so many boys in their 20s coming home, is that they were sheltered. They were sheltered from infancy, not to take risks,
Yes.
not to push forward.
Yes. One of the worst things we can do for our children is for our boys on the one hand to say, you will be a hero and you'll be wonderful. You become a Marine like your dad. That's pushing the child to the risk of having disposability aligned with being praised. But the other side of that coin is the opposite of saying, I don't want you to take this risk here because you might hurt yourself. Yes, the children will hurt themselves when they take a lot of risks, when they're roughhousing, when they climb a tree, and they will learn what risks are worth taking, what risks aren't. And their brain will keep developing to make them less and less stressed when they face a risk-taking situation because they've gotten more and more nuanced and well-developed skills as to how to take those risks, when to back off and when not.
I'd like to understand more about the difference between heroic intelligence and health intelligence. Can you clarify on that for me?
Sure. First, as a headline, heroic intelligence is training for a short life. Health intelligence is training for a long life. Health intelligence has two components to it: emotional health and physical health. And so when most parents bring up their sons, they're unconsciously in tension between wanting their sons to be a hero and wanting their sons to be healthy. So they might, particularly if they're a traditional family with a military background for a father or grandfather, they might want their sons, like John McCain, let's say, in his family. They might want their sons to be a hero. Now, they may not say it outwardly, but in the praise of the father, in the praise of the grandfather, in the stories that they hear being told, in watching football on TV and saying, oh man, you see that quarterback? He dislocated his shoulder and he's still throwing the football. Right. Now that is really quite amazing. And the boy is going, boy, I hear my father raising his praise for that that quarterback at Notre Dame who's throwing into all these crazy circumstances, and still he managed to get out there, tough it out, and win. So he's learning here to risk his life, to not pay attention to his fears, to not pay attention to pain in his body, to develop a no fear consciousness, and to become a hero like his father, his grandfather, the football player, and so on. Versus the father and mother will say as the boy goes out to the football game, now be careful. Well, he wouldn't be going out to the football game if he was really careful. There is a conflict, a tension that many parents experience between the mixed messages they give about pay attention to your health and pay attention to your feelings. But at the same time, we admire the boy who's not doing that. Now take it into real life experiences. Let's say it's Thanksgiving time and there's the homecoming game. And I remember this, I was interviewed a young man and his brother who told me this years after the experience. And the guy said, the older brother said, I was out there playing football, and it was Thanksgiving, and I was so nervous. It was the first time my father had come to see me play. The number one string quarterback had hurt himself. That's why we knew I was going to be playing for the first time at Thanksgiving. And I was so nervous. The first pass that came to me, I missed, and I should have really caught it. The second pass that came to me was harder, but I missed that too. The third pass that came to me, I'd gotten up my courage and I reached up and I caught a really good pass. And I not only caught the pass, but I managed to evade 2 tacklers and I got a touchdown. And it was at a crucial moment. And my father just let loose and said, "That's my son. That's my son." And years later, my brother said to me, when Dad yelled in such excitement about "That's my son," I wished I'd never heard him express that type of love for me. And that wasn't love, but it felt like love to that boy. And, and therefore what was left unsaid in that interview was that boy he was a more sensitive boy. He wasn't the football player type. He was never appreciated for the types of sensitivities and empathy that he was given for his role in life. Now, he did acknowledge that his dad and mom had sometimes said he was empathetic and appreciated him for that. But he never heard, "My son is the most empathetic, wonderful son you can possibly imagine." And so that's the type of what I call that process that I just described, son dropping, where the father is sort of dropping his son's name as, "I am the father of that son. I would like to be acknowledged for the way I have trained that son to become this football player that you have just seen catch this touchdown." And what the message is not given is, I have created the social bribes that have led my son to feel he would be more honored, more respected, more appreciated, more praised if he risked a concussion, if he risked a spinal cord injury, if he risked a dislocated shoulder, if he risked being in the hospital. And I really need to rethink that. I think it's fair to ask, what's a solution to that? And one of the best solutions that I think I heard one family share with me was a young boy said to me that he had family over for Christmas, for the holidays. He was playing ping pong. And there was a boy in the neighbor, a male member of the family that was about his age, and both of them were pretty competitive. And for some reason or other, he got it together in a close ping pong game for his opponent, who thought that one of the final points that he hit had missed the table. But in fact, he saw that it just barely nicked the end of the table. And he called it in his opponent's favor. And what brings tears to my eyes is that at dinner that night, at the Christmas dinner, that the father who had seen this happen said how wonderful it was that his son had given up the game to acknowledge what had really happened, that the boy who is the opponent had just nicked the end of the table and in fact had won the game, and how proud he was of his son for doing that. And everybody else at the table, after that prayer was over, this was the core of the prayer that the father did to enter into the Christmas dinner table. A fair amount of time after that, other people at the table acknowledged this boy for doing that. And almost all of them said, "I never would have had the emotional maturity to do that when I was your age. And I probably don't even have it now." And that is an example of the solution of making sure that your social bribes are in a direction of emotional intelligence and emotional health. Part of every human being is a part of your brain that is called the RCZ, the rostral cingulate zone. And when you get social approval, that part of the brain stimulates dopamine, which motivates you in a feel-good way to be even more of whatever way you got the social approval for. And so we have the power to give social approval to our sons, to have a balance between taking risks and protecting others, and also being emotionally thoughtful, empathetic, and intelligent. And it's our job, and it takes two parents to do this, to combine, to give our sons the directions to be able to do that combination of heroic and health intelligence. And that's what's different between raising our sons in the past versus raising our sons in the best way for the future.
We're no longer looking at a world where we want our kids to go to war and die at 25. We want our children to make 80, 90, 100. And we currently are not doing that construct.
Yes.
We're pushing for disposability, and we're pushing for single parenting.
Yes.
When I read The Boy Crisis, it's very clear in chapter 17 that single parenting has terrible life outcomes, that intact families have great outcomes in general, and 50-50 maximum parental involvements have great outcomes. Can you talk to me about that? And also talk to me about step parenthood and versus bio dad, etc.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, we do need to know that children do best when raised by both parents. So let's be really tough about this now.
Does that mean equal time?
That means equal time, because when fathers have only a small percentage of the time, a lot of the contributions that dads make cannot be taken advantage of. I was talking a little while ago about the child that comes home from the playground and gets into a fight. That fight becomes an experience that the child can grow from, to learn when to watch, when are the red flags of danger that you need to pay attention to. And so something that's negative can be turned into a positive by a parenting that isn't just likely to say, well, from now on, you don't go to the playground, or from now on, you can only go when I'm free to stay there, and watch you and protect you. But rather that trust the child to increase his or her skill sets to know when risk taking is going too far and when to take the risks. And so that's one of the contributions of father involvement, but it can't be done in a minimal amount of time, because the child has to build trust. The child has to be able to talk about these things at night. So where boys in particular are most likely to express their feelings is at bedtime, when they're about ready to get a story read to them. And a story is read to them. And then something in the story reminds them of something that happened during the day that they're hurt about, or feel bullied about, or feel sad about. And they feel, in that quiet time, they feel the invitation to open up and to speak up about dad. And then they know that they can speak to their dad and get a different response from their dad than their mom. Their mom is more likely to listen empathetically and maybe to warn them against repeating that type of experience. The dad is more likely to sort of listen empathetically for a while and then say to them, what could you have done differently? And so on. Both are important contributions to a child's development, but they need both. And that happens only when there's about 50-50 time, where the bonding has a chance to take place. The highest correlates for girls, and close to the highest correlate for boys in terms of psychological health, is having hangout time with dads. Studies done at the University of California at Irvine by Hayward have shown that that girls that hang out with dads have an increase in emotional security and psychological security that outpaces any other correlate that they were able to measure. Boys also benefit extraordinarily from that. So, for example, a boy, we pick up, let's say a mother or father picks up a boy from a soccer game and said, how's the game? The kid's likely to say, if it's a boy, yeah, all right, I'm fine. And then, sweetie, is anything bothering you? No, I'm fine. So then with hangout time later, as maybe the kid's doing homework or watching something on TV, and the father's around at the same level of the house, and they both walk into the kitchen and they get something out of the refrigerator. In the process of getting something out of the refrigerator, the boy says, Yeah, Dad, if maybe if a coach, if you played goalie last week and the coach said you were doing really well, but this week he didn't let me be the coach again. I mean, he didn't let me be the goalie again. What's that about? Why would he ever say I was doing well and then not let me be the goalie again this week? And then that comes out when there's hangout time, when there's enough emotional security for the child to ask that question off the cuff. And the child could ask that question of the mother. Could he? Yes. But he'd be almost guaranteed that the mother would give an empathetic response. Whereas the child with the father may feel that there's some empathy, but in addition to the empathy, the father might give him an honest answer, like maybe he wanted to give another boy a chance, or maybe he didn't feel you did play as well. Maybe you should ask him what you could have done differently to make it better. There'd be more probing like that from the father, chances are, which the mother might feel was insensitive to the child's feelings. That's what comes out in hangout time. And hangout time comes when the father has plenty of time to have an experience of emotional security where the child feels comfortable enough not just to be asked to express his or her feelings off the cuff, which boys do not do very often. And if they do it, it's usually because of being overprotected. And so that's an example of the value of equal time.
Another thing I found interesting in your book is the fact that when you run 50/50s, when you run equal time, mom gets time off to herself. She gets more time to either go back to school, to engage in a higher earning career, and a better life outcome for her. Can you talk to me about that a little bit?
Absolutely. When mothers have equal time, first of all, they have what many, many women crave, which is time to themselves. They have what many other women crave, which is time for a spiritual life, time for, if they're a faith-based person, a faith-oriented person, time for church, time for God, time for prayer. What many other women crave is time for women friends. What many other women crave is time for sports or time to do work out at the gym. These are all things that develop the health and the spirituality and the emotional feeling of some type of serenity and peace and balance in life that many, many women crave. I'm married now for my second and last time. And the first time I was married was many years ago. And then I had a 21-year period of being single. Well, after a period of being single, I realized that there were two types of females I was dating. One was girls and one was women. And the women were mostly people who had children. And so I started increasingly dating females with children. In about an 18-year period of dating only those types of women before I married the woman with children that I married, I saw one word was used more than any other word from among those women. And that word was overwhelmed, because the women felt overwhelmed with handling, bringing in some income, even when they had money coming in from the father. It usually was not enough, and they usually worked in addition to that when they were a single mother. And in addition to that, they felt they were never doing as good a job as they wanted to at work, and they were never doing as good a job as they wanted to with their children. And the solution is right in front of us. And the solution is fathers' rights groups all around the entire world are fighting for the right to be with their children more. Many of them are willing to pay child support and be with their children equally. Fathers need children once they discover that they need children, which is usually pretty young if they get involved in that at an early age. But more importantly, the children need the fathers, the mothers need the time and the balance in their life, and the fathers need the children and the balance in their life. Children give divorced fathers something to live for, something to be a good man for, but they don't know where and how they're valued. I ran for governor of California, and I went around to a lot of prisons. And when I spoke to prisoners about the importance of fathers to their children's lives, I had these tough male prisoners come up to me and start crying and saying, I never realized that my children could benefit from me. I just felt I was a bad man who had done bad things and probably deserved to be here. Now I have, for the first time in my life, the incentive to get out of here, to be able to help my children not make the mistakes that I made that put me in prison. And we look at particularly the African American population, where You and I were talking before about 80% of the African American males having been in prison at one point or another. And we see how important this is, not only as a gender issue, but also as a race issue.
It is. It's the ultimate example of male disposability.
Yes.
I talked with a man in Wisconsin, African American man, and he basically said, he was 70. He said, "You took away our water fountains, and then you took away our boys."
Yes.
It's that simple.
Yes. And the issue about taking away your boys and your daughters is the issue of purpose. In the boy crisis, I talk about ikigai, and ikigai is Japanese for a sense of purpose. And studies show that when someone feels they have a sense of purpose, they live longer and they live happier, and they live longer in part because they live happier. And so, and sense of purpose was so important to males in particular, because partially females had it built into their biology. At any time, they were encouraged to have children. And if they wished to have children and they had that personality, they had a sense of purpose in that direction. If they wished to have a career today, they could have a sense of purpose in that direction. It wasn't true years ago. But guys used to have the old sense of purpose of war or work. And today that sense of purpose has been diminished. It's wonderful that boys have more flexibility. But the value of fathers in a boy's life is that if a boy has a purpose void, I no longer have to go to war. I no longer have to be a sole breadwinner. If he has a purpose void, and then that purpose void is compounded by a dad void, he has no way of taking his sense of purpose, that is the dad and mom discovering his unique self, and then matching that unique self to a way of making a living doing that. That is a complex operation that you need both parents weighing in on, so that the boy is discovered for who he is uniquely, and at the same time is encouraged to channel it not just to his own fulfillment, but also to the responsibilities he may potentially have as a future father.
So we deal with the purpose void, and that I also want to look at the construct that we are spending over $3 trillion a year of the federal government to deal with the boy crisis. Every year, we have a budget of 20, and we're spending $3 trillion a year to deal with the fallout of that. As opposed to if we ran 50-50s, we ran maximum parental involvement, we would see most of that evaporate. Is that correct?
That's about correct. And no one has an exact figure on this, but just to make sure that you understand that we're not exaggerating here. Just let me give you a few examples. You heard me say a little while ago that ISIS recruits are almost completely either boys with minimal or no father involvement, or among the girls with minimal or no father involvement. Think of the trillions or so dollars we spend with all the ramifications of defending ourselves against ISIS. And think of the loss of rights and freedoms that we have, and we justify to have all the security that we have at the airports, and all the security that we're increasingly having at schools, and all the security that we have around the country, just for paying for the multiple levels of security, to say nothing about the insecurities in our psyches about being attacked by ISIS. And so the disruption of our foreign policy and the enormous amount of money we spend doing all sorts of decisions foreign policy wise to protect against ISIS. So that's just ISIS. Then take prisons. We've had a 700% increase in the prison population nationwide. But in California, there's been 18 new prisons and versus one new university built in the last, I think it's 3 decades. And we all know the enormous amount of costs that it takes to house prisoners, to say nothing of, and when we measure that cost, we often talk about the cost of prisons. We don't talk about the loss of income coming from boys who could then pay taxes, are now, instead of paying taxes, they're absorbing taxpayer money. So when we look at those types of lost opportunities, when we look at the fact that boys who have minimal to no father involvement are far more likely to drop out of school, and in addition to committing crimes, they're far more likely to be unemployed. So a boy who drops out of high school has a 20% unemployment rate when he's in his 20s, one of the highest levels of normal employment for boys. And during that normal employment period of having a 20% unemployment rate, Those are all boys that are absorbing taxpayer money and not paying money in taxes. We then go into the mental health issues of boys who commit suicide, boys who are depressed, boys who are taking drugs as a result of countering that depression, the opioid crisis, which a high percentage of which comes out of boys who are taking drugs and being self-destructive and causing pain to themselves and cutting and doing other things. All of these costs together are about $3 trillion a year, is what I calculated when I wrote The Boy Crisis. And those are $3 trillion a year that we could be building incentives for boys to be involved in families, programs to honor boys, and instead of saying, Uncle Sam needs you to potentially die as a warrior, to say we are now going to be talking about boys as future father warriors and building up boys' skill sets in first, second, third grade. What is the single most important skill set we can build up for a boy to be a father warrior? It is not even directly related to fathering. It's related to communication. We should be having communication skill training in the United States and all developed nations, as they do in Denmark, in first and second grade, so that both boys and girls learn how to communicate with each other. We find that when boys and girls hear the way each other feels and what they think, that there's an evaporation of bullying. So if we want to stop bullying, we don't just bully the bullies. We recognize that bullies and the bullied are usually very similar personalities, low self-concept personalities. And people improve in their self-concept when they hear that they're being paid attention to and heard by other people in the classroom.
So I want to be really clear. Every time I go to the airport, it's because I'm worried about terrorists or some person doing something. That's the boy crisis.
That's the boy crisis. That's usually lack of father involvement. So
yes,
you're going through this long line of at the airport. Think this is because I have not supported an increase in father involvement.
Correct. So I have not moved for 50-50 in my state. Mm-hmm. Every time we go to the airport, it's because lack of father involvement. It's because the boy crisis, and we've not pushed for 50-50 involvement because boys that hurt us.
Yes.
Whenever we talk about prisons and the judicial system, whenever we spend $75,000 a year in California to put somebody in prison, that's the boy crisis. That's lack of father involvement. That's me not voting for 50-50. Whenever we have an opioid crisis, that's lack of father involvement. That's the boy crisis. That's me not pushing for 50-50s in my state, correct?
Correct.
Whenever I go to school and see ADHD meds and kids on ADHD meds, that's more than likely lack of father involvement. That's the boy crisis. And that's not me pushing for 50-50 maximum parental involvement, correct?
Correct.
When I look at 8 out of 10 people that commit suicide are men, more than likely, that is the boy crisis. That's lack of father involvement. That's not pushing for maximum parental involvement in 50-50s, correct?
More than anything else, yes, correct.
When we talk about failing schools or crime, more than likely that has to do with the boy crisis, lack of father involvement, and me not pushing for 50-50 outcomes in my state. Is that correct?
More than anything else, yes.
So when we look at homelessness and the drastic increase of homelessness we have and people holding signs, that has to do with the boy crisis and lack of father involvement, more likely than not, correct?
Correct.
When we talk about failing schools, when we talk about drugs, when we talk about teenage suicide, teenage pregnancy, that has to do with lack of father involvement, more likely than not, correct?
Correct.
When we talk about government spending having to do with single parenting and all the picadillos with that, that has to do with the boy crisis and lack of father involvement, more likely than not, correct?
Correct. So let me be clear. Father involvement is not the only variable in the boy crisis. There are about 10 causes of the boy crisis. Some are environmental, some are the purpose for it, like I mentioned before, but some are this historical gap between heroic intelligence and health intelligence. But more than any other single thing of the 10 causes of the boy crisis is lack of father involvement, either minimal father involvement or no father involvement.
When we talk about the health crisis, the sperm counts of men and things
Yes.
like that, it has to do with the growing amount of estrogen in our water.
When we talk about that aspect of the boy crisis, yes, we're talking about the propensity of of us as a nation and as a world.
So when we talk about young men's sperm count, how it's drastically lower, how much is it lower and why is it lower?
It's lower by about 50% than it was in a generation before. And one of the reasons it's lower, and one of the reasons that girls are developing more quickly and boys are developing less quickly, is because when we throw plastics near streams and near lakes like Lake Apopka in Florida, those plastics leach. They leach something called phthalates. Those phthalates mimic estrogen. The mimicking of estrogen increases the speed at which women develop puberty faster than it used to, and it decreases the speed that males reach puberty than they used to. So we've always had a gap between girls and females, girls and boys' maturity. Girls have almost, for a long period of time, and in most cultures, become mature more quickly than boys do. Now that gap is just increasing. And then we're doing crazy things. We're asking boys to be the less mature sex, to risk sexual rejection from the more mature sex. We're saying sex is dirty, where we're saying you, the less mature sex, should initiate the dirt. You should know what you're doing, when you're doing it, why you're doing it, and you should feel probably badly about being so focused on sex and pornography, but being afraid to risk it with real life women, when in fact nobody explains to you that pornography is access to a large variety of attractive women without fear of rejection. And yet we just shame boys for reaching out toward pornography, and also don't educate them that they're really harming their brain when they get addicted to pornography. And to say nothing of the fact that they're building up expectations of women that will make them almost 100% likely to have failed relationships with women. So it's everybody loses.
What is the life outcome for women that basically loot everyone? Meaning, I initiate divorce. I get a huge settlement. I get a huge alimony settlement. I get a huge child support settlement, and I get the kids 27 days a month. But what happens is that because they're getting this influx of cash in their 30s and 40s, by the time the music stops, they are now into age discrimination, and they have no way of really supporting themselves. That's what we're calling the divorce rate premium. And what ends up happening is I was challenged by someone about it in the New York Times, and she told me you should walk into a grocery store, into Safeway or Kroger or HEB or Giant or Trader Joe's, and go find how many women you see are 60 that have no wedding bands. Mm-hmm. Because they basically, they got divorced, they looted everybody, and now they picked up their feet, and their life outcomes are tragic because of it.
Yes. The life outcome of women and men who divorce is usually worse for everybody. Women oftentimes do get the children, and they believe that they're the right parents for the children, and they are mistaken. The right parents for the children are both parents, and both parents for about an equal amount of time. But what happens for the woman is that she is overwhelmed, exhausted, and doesn't do the job that she wishes to do with the children. She devotes her life, her caring, her heart, her nurturance, her psyche, her soul to the children. And what happens? They're far more likely to be disobedient, disrespectful for her. They're far more likely to be coercive toward their mom. And so the mom is experiencing, instead of the dream of a wonderful, sensitive, loving, caring child making full use and maximum use of his intelligence, they're getting a child who is very intelligent, but misusing his intelligence unmotivated. They don't know how to get the electronics away from him. They don't know how to stop him from being addicted to video games. They fear that when they walked in, that the child was focused on porn. The child is not having the life she or he wants to have in terms of being able to initiate in a healthy way with women. If he's initiating with men, he feels shameful about it. And she is sort of like, my life's heart and soul. It's like being a CEO of a company that says, you are not the right CEO, you are a bad CEO. We're going to take the CEO-ship away from you. Everything she poured her identity into, her heart into, is taken away from, is not working out the way she hoped. And she can't admit it because she can't admit it to herself, and she can't talk about it to others because it just emits the shame.
It emits the shame.
Secondly, The father is feeling lost without his son and without his daughter, because when males lose relationships, they're far more likely to go into depression and into suicide. Kopasawa found that when a male and female divorce, a male is 10 times as likely to commit suicide, 10 times as likely to commit suicide as his wife.
And on that report, based on a population outcome, that means 40 men a week. 40 men a week are killing themselves from the family court a week. And on that report, I find it was really interesting. It was people that said, basically wrote a note that said, I'm killing myself because I'm getting a divorce and blah, 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 blah. Well, the ultimate problem in all that is that it's not talking about men that are 2 years later that have been in and out of the system 3 or 4 times, that engage in risky behavior, commit suicide by cop if you're African American, right? Or if you commit suicide by cop if you are in the lower half, etc. Or if you drive your car risky and get in an accident and kill yourself. Or if you overdose, what they say on the report is, oh, that man killed themselves because they were depressed. Or that man died because he committed homicide and he was killed by the cops or killed by gang violence. Right. They're not talking about any of this. They're not saying it's not really 40 a week. It's more like in the hundreds a week.
Yes, we have to really understand the deeper foundation of all this, which is that men grow up love deprived. When you learn to hold your feelings to yourself and not share who you are, you're learning to cut off yourself as a human being. And men had to learn to do this to be heroes. This is what a hero did. Every man who was successful learned to repress his feelings, not express his feelings. He learned that if he talked about, he was having challenges with his marriage and he talked about it with a colleague at work who was the person he felt the closest to, that the colleague would listen for a few seconds, maybe a minute or two, and then the eyes would begin to glaze over. And he'd realize that if he continued talking like this, he was going to just sort of distance the colleagues. And then he realized that if he had obligations to his family and that colleague might report to somebody else that he was just preoccupied with this divorce and really hurting from that, so maybe he shouldn't be promoted. Then he starts feeling ashamed because he's not promoted. So he learns in 100 different ways, a male does, to disconnect from his heart and his soul and his feelings. So, and then he learns that the only person he can possibly express those feelings to is that one woman he met who seems to be able to listen to him when he shares his feelings. But he doesn't often realize that woman respects him in part in a Lois Lane type of way. And a Lois Lane type of way, what I mean by that is Lois Lane did not fall in love with Clark Kent. Lois Lane wanted Superman to express his feelings, not Clark Kent to express his feelings. And so the male doesn't learn that the woman who falls in love with him did not fall in love with him because he expressed his feelings. She fell in love with him because she respected his ability to perform and his strength and his ability to protect. And then when he had all those things like Superman did, then she also wanted him to express his feelings. And then when he did with her, she heard him. And when he felt heard, he felt whole. And when he had children, yes, additional responsibility, but this was the love of his life. And then suddenly, the one person who understood him, who loved him, suddenly is filing for divorce and taking the children with him and increasing the pressure on him to pay more while he gets less love. We don't understand that men are love dependent exactly because they've been cut off from the skills of love. And then we marry with the hope of more love, more compassion, more understanding, and we pour all our emotional eggs into the basket of the woman that loves us. That's unfair to women, by the way, and it's also unfair to men to not have many outlets for their love. When men and women get into crisis situation, women know enough to go to therapists. They know enough to go to their women friends. When they go to their women friends, the women almost always say, yes, I always thought that he wasn't worthy of you. And you'll always be able to find a better man. Don't worry about it. And besides, I saw this flaw in him and this flaw and this flaw in him. Versus when a man goes to another man and talks about the problems he's having, he gets at most that 3-minute window of opportunity, and then things begin to go against him. So he becomes very needy of women's love, for better and for worse. And we need to know that when men and women break up in relationships, when heterosexual relationships break up, your son is much more likely to go into depression, alienation, distance, feeling of loss, in part because he doesn't know how to talk about those things and those feelings. and than our girls. And so girls will express that loss to a much greater degree, cry for help, but their crying for help is exactly part of the solution, whereas boys not crying for help is part of the problem.
I want to talk about time trumps dime. If you're a legislator and you have the construct that, you know what, men just need to pay child support, and these are just men trying to not pay child support, and this is just a game to do this. What is the life outcome? What does all the research say? Not a little bit. What if all the research, the thousands and thousands of studies, talk about time over dime?
Yes. So what I say in the boy crisis is dad's time trumps dad's dime. And that's fun and cute. But the truth is that that's based on hundreds and hundreds of peer-reviewed studies that are so aggregately persuasive that for the first time in human history that I'm aware of, more than 100 psychologists and researchers in this area got together. They wrote in unanimous consent that the children need their father about equally to their mother in the case of divorce. You never see psychologists and researchers, especially psychologists, get together with the academic ego and territoriality and the belief that we only have the right answers, etc.
It's not just a tidal wave, it's a tsunami.
Yes,
of people that never get along, and they get along on one thing.
Right.
The one thing is
they understand that the research is overwhelming. For years, it was said that children who did better when they had father involvement was because in the intact family you had more money or you lived in better neighborhoods and so on. So they controlled for money, they controlled for neighborhoods, they controlled for education of the fathers and mothers, they controlled for virtually every variable. And each study started showing that the outcome was the same, that the degree of difference between the health of a child who has both father and mother involvement, who has 4 things after divorce, is so different from the health of a child that doesn't. And among those 4 things that are what I call the 4 must-dos if you must have a divorce. And if you must have a divorce, if these 4 must-dos are attended to, your child has a reasonable chance of doing well.
So the first is
an equal amount of time with mother and father. The second is the father and mother living within about 20 minutes drive time of each other so that the children don't have to give up activities or friends in order to see the other parent,
Right.
and therefore don't resent the other parent when they lose their activities or their friends.
that has to do with practicality in the day to day.
Yes.
Just because you're breaking up doesn't mean it's the end. And you don't want to separate your kids from their peer groups, their schools, and all their clubs.
Yes, exactly.
And that's why it's important.
Right. And therefore the children feel like they not only have the disruption of the instability of a lack of parents, but every time that they go from one parent to another, that they lose friends, they lose activities, they lose the ability to have stability in that part of their life. Number 3, the children are not able to hear or detect any bad mouthing or body language that indicates negativity about the other parent when they're speaking about the other parent. The children say to me, I had a wonderful time at mom's today. And my response is, as a parent, oh, you'll have an even better time with with stepmom now. Or you'll have a better time with us this weekend. Or I don't say anything. I just sort of say, and I'm cold or I'm distant.
Right.
The child learns, don't talk positively about the other parent around me. That I'm not going to be able to have more intimacy with the other parent if I'm talking positively about the other. That's bad mouthing via body language, not
Right.
just words. Also, one other thing on that issue, I have heard many parents swear to me that their kids did not overhear them saying something negative on the phone, but what the child tells me that they picked up is the difference in tone of voice that they heard from the kitchen while they were in their bedroom. Mom didn't think or dad didn't think that there was anything negative being said, but the child could feel that something negative was being said about dad just from the difference in tone of voice and maybe picking up dad as part of the conversation.
And number 4?
Number 4, the parents spend significant time doing relationship counseling that has two parameters to it. Number one, it's consistent relationship counseling, even if it's only once every 3 weeks, even if it's done in community service, people at a poor neighborhood. The children that did best are ones where the parents were involved consistently with relationship counseling. Consistently is distinct from emergency-based counseling. If you go to counselors when there's only an emergency, the chances are you need to solve the problem sooner, and you're more likely to make the other parent wrong, and you only see the other parent when you're in emergency mode. And so therefore you don't have a chance to think through and feel through with compassion the other parent's strategy and best intent at making decisions the way they're making them. And so that's why consistent relationship counseling needs to be on the schedule, even when you don't have an emergency.
So if we don't want kids to be drug addicts, want them to graduate, want them to go to college, want them to get married and stay married, want them to have successful adult lives, we need to follow the 4 must-dos, correct?
Yes, exactly. After divorce.
After divorce.
And the other big issue is to, before you make a decision to have a child, do the research on why children need a significant amount of father involvement so that you don't raise a child on your own and think it's just fine to do so, and think that having a stepfather or you doing the father type of role is going to be enough. If you believe that your new husband is going to be a better stepfather than the biological father is a father, know that almost always the stepfather perceives himself to be an advisor, and that the dynamic between a biological mother and a stepfather is one where the biological mother does make the final decision. And all of the dad-style parenting that a stepfather can potentially bring to a child's life, like roughhousing, is likely to be inhibited by a biological mother with a lot more power and potency than she will do with a biological father. And so there's a tendency for the stepfather to eventually back out of equal parenting engagement and just become a breadwinner. And so that's part of the problem if you think a stepfather is the solution. If you feel that you're a biological mom, but you're not, living with a father, but you're not married to him, understand that the chances are that the dynamic of you being the primary parent is going to lead to the father being uninvolved and feeling that he's not valued, and therefore leaving the child's life within the first 3 to 4 years. What you can do if you are a single mom is to get your son involved with Cub Scouts, get him involved with Boy Scouts, get him involved in a faith-based community where a good male pastor is both a role model and helping him meet with other boys his age to talk about the feelings that all the boys his age have, so he doesn't feel so lonely and isolated. Make sure he's involved in a lot of physical activities, a lot of camping, a lot of outdoor activities, a lot of adventures, and a lot of risk-taking. Make sure you roughhouse with him. Make sure you learn the difference between boundary enforcement and boundary setting, and enforce that in your life.
One thing that struck me that really moved my soul in reading The Boy Crisis was how dangerous it is to be a young man or a teenage male or a male in their 20s to date, mate, marry, have a relationship with a woman of this male shame. Can we talk about that?
You know, one of the things I watched some time ago, a slam poem that won an award, a Hatch Award, for being one of the most creative and powerful and slam poems. It was by Royce Mann. And Royce Mann is a 14-year-old boy, or was a 14-year-old boy. And the slam poem went something like this. You know, when I was a boy, I discovered who Peter Pan was, and when I did not want to become a man, I made that discovery when I was on a street, and on that street in front of me was a woman, and a woman looked back and glanced at me, and when she glanced at me, she crossed the street, and at that moment, I knew I never wanted to become a man. I never wanted to become a man because I knew that she knew that I, a man, when I am a man, I will be mostly, yes, I'll be a father, yes, I'll be a brother, but I'll be mostly an attacker. I will be mostly an attacker. 14 years old. defining the transition from boyhood to manhood as the transition to being mostly an attacker, feeling so fearful of that being his identity that he wanted to remain a boy and not become a man. And this is the brightest. This is the best. This is one of the most fiercely intelligent boys I've observed, using all his creativity to be a sword to the shame within him. And so that's the larger picture that I'm hearing. I live in Mill Valley, California, one of the most liberal communities in the country. And when I go to slam poetry events here in Mill Valley, the same thing coming from the boys, and attacks on males and men and boys as having male privilege and male power coming from the females. It reaches only applause. Those are the people who win the slam poetry contest. What's happening here is that everything males have done to sacrifice themselves, to be willing to be warriors, to be willing to earn money, to be willing to take the hazardous jobs, what I call the glass cellar occupations, the garbage collectors, the jobs that are constantly driving the night shifts, the jobs that are the dirty jobs, the unpleasant jobs are almost all held by males. And the additional money we make to get what I call the death professions bonus has been turned against our fathers. And instead of saying, thank you for making these sacrifices so that you'd earn more money to support the family, we have turned it on its head and said, this reflects discrimination in your favor, the fact that you earn more money, as opposed to understanding that the road to high pay is a toll road. You get high pay because you're willing to serve somebody else, a boss, a company better, not to serve yourself better. You're willing to forfeit your personal power in order to gain more income power to protect your families. Instead of thanking our fathers and our grandfathers for these sacrifices, feminists have gone ahead and focused on this as being more male privilege and male power. So that has left an entire culture of women good and men bad.
Men bad.
Women victims, men perpetrators, and it's left a contradictory message. On the one hand, we hear, I am woman, I am strong. And then the other hand, we hear, I am woman, I've been wronged. And this is then reinforced by laws that most people who are unaware can't even believe exist, such as 26 states in the United States having some version of an affirmative consent law. So you have a sweet, wonderful young male. He goes to college. In almost every college in half of the states in the United States, if he asks a woman on a date, and then on that date he reaches over and takes her hand, and she is able to say to him, I consider that sexual harassment, and that will be legally considered sexual harassment if she interprets it that way. She is legally able to say, I did not give affirmative consent. That is, I was not asked by you before you took my hand whether or not it was okay with me to take my hand, and therefore I can consider that sexual harassment. Because even though I agreed to the date, that did not mean I agreed to you touching my hand during that date.
Right, but why this is important is if she did it to him, it would not be in violation of any law.
And even if the law was made gender neutral, as some of the laws in some states are, there's no male that is heterosexual or even gay who, when touched by a female on a date that he agreed to, would ever say to that the woman was the sexual harasser. I have looked at the records of the OCR, the Office of Civil Rights. They do not show males under that type of circumstances accusing females. Interestingly, there are many female employers, and we just saw the case of the female nuns and female social workers in prison situations that do reach out and use their power to molest boys and males. Those are female nuns and those female social workers. They usually do not make headlines, and they are not prosecuted.
And when they do, so here's the hard. I see a 27-year-old teacher who's a male rape a 15-year-old girl. He goes to prison for 10 years. Then I see a 27-year-old female teacher. She has an inappropriate relationship with a 15-year-old male. What's that about?
It is about a double standard, and it's about a sort of socially deep understanding that when we think of a woman taking advantage of a male, we think of the male who's a teenager really wanting it anyway, and whereas we think of the female who's a teenager as being raped. We live in a culture where that type of double standard exists, and the punishment for the male is he's seen as a predator, a rapist. Even if that girl is 17 and the male is 21, he can often be seen as a rapist.
As a rape.
Because the statutory rape division line is usually around 18 in most states. This is part of our double standard, and so we talk about equality on the one hand, and we talk of I am woman, I am strong, and with the hashtag Me Too movement, I am very glad there was a hashtag Me Too movement. If the hashtag Me Too movement was the beginning of a complex process, meaning that if women stood up and said, here is what's bothering me about the way many men behave, then men say, here is what's bothering me about the dating process, about the sexuality process, about that I live in a culture which says sex is dirty, and then says, oh, by the way, guys, you're expected to initiate the dirt. And if you do it too quickly, you're a date rapist or a sexual harasser. And if you don't do it quickly enough, you're a wimp. And if you don't do it quickly enough, we'll never know that you're even interested in us. You won't get the woman you want. And by the way, we really go out most of the time with the guys that do take the risks. But each guy that takes that risk is risking the possibility of being prosecuted or persecuted for that. This does not mean that the males have it all right. A lot of men way overreach their bounds, but they need to be met with women who say, no, it's not okay. I'm not interested in being sexual with you. Not women who go to the house of famous and successful men that have bad reputations and then use their power to get their power increased, like in Harvey Weinstein type of thing, going 4 years with relationships with Harvey Weinstein and then getting all the advantages that Harvey Weinstein can bring to a female who is sexual with him, and then having the complaint and the monologue be one way. It's a dialogue.
Let me ask you this question. I have no doubt. I say that fully as a man, fully. The problem is that we have a double standard in a culture where women can sleep their way to the top of a company and not get prosecuted. It's not punished at all.
Mm.
Harvey Weinstein very clearly slept with women and gave them rewards for sleeping with him.
Yes.
They engage in a quid pro quo. The woman over here that sleeps her way to the top of a company engaged in a quid pro quo. Why is she not prosecuted while he is?
We have two things going on. One is we have a clear double standard. And number two is we have a culture which only shares the pain of the female and not the pressure of the male to have to go through so many sacrifices to get power to begin with, and then to feel that he needs to be willing to give to a woman something when he asks for sex for her, because it's clear in the social exchange that her sex is worth a lot more than his sex is, and therefore he owes her something as a result of having her sexual, quote, favors. Even the word favors shows the bias.
The bias.
But the real equivalent of Harvey Weinstein's is not the reversal and that discrimination. The real equivalent of Harvey Weinstein's is females who planned to get a male pregnant and then have child support come from that male while she raised the child on her own. And that was part of her plan or her plot to begin with. There are ugly men in this world, and Harvey Weinstein clearly has a gifted side and an ugly side. Also, there are ugly women in this world who do really terrible things, but we don't have a culture of hashtag Me Too, of men speaking up about the terrible women that falsely accuse them of doing things with the children that was the equivalent of parental alienation. And then the world is knowing about the 1,000 worst mothers who were only interested in getting money from the father, and then were moving off to a different state without regard for their children having contact with their father, and planned all along to marry a man who was very wealthy, so their children would have the protection of his wealth, but never really planned to stay with him to begin with. Only a small fraction of women are like that, but only a small fraction of men are Harvey Weinsteins. But the Harvey Weinsteins are in our face all the time. The most negative women are not in our face. And so we've been walking around in our psyches in a culture of women good, men bad.
Women good, men bad.
And,
That's exactly correct.
And that is a toxic attitude toward men.
And that leads to men just throwing their hands up and walking out the door.
Yes. And so
marriage is collapsing because of this. Men
Yes.
are running away.
Yes. Men are both deeply attracted to women. Men need women because the degree to which the man is a traditional man and unable to be a completely emotionally healthy within himself is the degree to which he will be emotionally dependent on women, just like the woman who doesn't take care of herself financially will be attracted to men who will take care of her financially, and neither will get their needs met. That is the tango that we must unravel. Every time a woman complains, we have to understand that a woman and a man have evolved to be in a tango where the woman is attract the man and then resist until she finds out whether he's the right man completely, until she discovers how he handles no's, which is one of the reasons why women say no even when they are interested, because they want to find out how a man handles no's, because if a man handles no's badly, that gives them a signal to get out. And if the man handles no's well, that gives them a signal and permission to go to that next level. So there's a purpose for the man initiating and the woman saying no for a while and backing off. And there's lots of purposes. That's just one of them. But the point there is, if we're going to change that dynamic between men and women, that entire tango needs to be changed. And when that entire tango needs to be changed, we need to hear how women are hurt and hear how men are hurt. When I hear the fact that it's not just women that are hurt this way and men that are hurt that way, it is some women hurt this way and some women feel the opposite of that. And there's some men that feel this way and some men that feel the opposite of that. The women's movement has been not just a sexist movement. It's been a movement that has not acknowledged conservative women nearly enough. So the feminist movement has been a movement about liberal women and the way liberal women feel. It has not been a movement about the way conservative women feel, about the way Christian women feel. What we need is every part of the male-female movement to be willing to represent the feminist perspective and more conservative women's perspectives, liberal men's perspectives and more conservative men's perspectives. No movement on gender can be a balanced, loving movement unless it represents all four of those perspectives. What we have done to this point in history is take a magnifying glass to women's experience of powerlessness and women's experience of male power. But no one has taken a magnifying glass to the male experience of powerlessness and the male experience of female power. The male experience of walking around at the age of 14 with his testosterone running wild and wanting to have sex with every female who's 2/3 of the way attractive or 1/3 of the way attractive in his class, and having to hold off from doing so because he knows that if he reaches out and touches her or kisses her, does what he feels like doing, he'll be prosecuted or shamed. That's just a fraction of the male experience of powerlessness that he feels before women. And that powerlessness is being flaunted before him every day in commercials and on TV and in every way, and no outlet for the male feelings. We condemn men for not expressing their feelings, and we condemn them when they express their feelings.
It's a double-edged sword.
Yes.
It's a catch-22.
Yes.
So what you're saying is that a balanced man, a mindful man, needs to learn how to deal with his emotions in a balanced perspective and not need women so hard.
Yes, and that will happen when some concrete solutions occur. When every first and second grade and third grade has communication skills training built into their curriculum,
Like in Denmark.
like they do in Denmark. But it needs to be more than just educating the children. If the children are educated to be more emotionally fluent and be able to handle criticism without becoming defensive, which is the crucial ingredient of emotional intelligence. The Achilles heel of all human beings is our inability to handle personal criticism from loved ones, or even those that we care about, or even people that we care about in kindergarten and first grade. But if the children learn how to do that in first and second and third grade, and then they go home to parents that do not know how to do that, then they will have disrespect from their parents, which will also undermine the family. And so the training has to occur for both our kids and for us as adults. We need to have that training in every marriage. It needs to be part, if we want to legislate it or anything, legislate the need to go to communication training before you get married as a condition of marriage. That will allow marriages not to be just legislated to be together, but the solution is not legislation, it's communication. And people say, "Oh, the problem is not the communication; it's money, it's children, it's sexuality." The problem is not money, children, and sexuality; it's the way we communicate about money, children, and sexuality.
Dr. Farrell,
Thank you.
it has been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you so
It's
much.
been my pleasure too.
Thank you so
Really.
much.